action has been launched by families of those killed and maimed by guns smuggled to gangsters by cops. One of those involved in the original investigation of this was the former head of Western Cape Detectives, General Jeremy Vearey. Welcome, General.
Hi. Thank you.
General, during that 5-year period that you investigated, how many arms were smuggled from cops to gangsters?
Okay, I'm just going to speak about the Western Cape situation
Yes.
on the basis of Prince Lou himself after we arrested him, his plea bargaining statement. Now, according to him, for the Western Cape alone, he smuggled, and he indicated in his plea bargain, about 2,400 guns. These guns were included military weapons. That means our standard SANDF issues, but all our firearms that were surrendered to the state. It included a large amount of civilian firearms that were surrendered to the state. It included firearms, I don't know if you know, in the mid-90s, with the privatization of state institutes, of some semi-statal, parastatal companies like Eskom, who used to have their own arsenals before. And ISCO and all of those things now, because they were privatized, they had to give up those arsenals. So it included those arsenals too. So it's a substantive amount of state firearms, and it included firearms, particularly of the police. And this is where the SANDF also come in, because certain international companies, arms production companies like Fabrique Nationale, or the FN, makes FN Brownings and all those firearms, and our R1, by the way, which they claim we copied, and our R5 and our R4. They, after our President Mandela came to power, they decided that they had enough of us copying their firearms, and so did various other companies in the world, including the firearms seized in the Angolan War, and they decided that we should get rid of these firearms. They should be destroyed, and we should now go back to getting the original stuff or develop our own originally. So you can imagine the glut of firearms that came in after that proclamation was made, and after we had to accede to what the international community called our criminal production, copying of their firearms. So that is the big bulk. But for the Western Cape in particular, there was a preference to a particular type of firearm, and that was a firearm that the police had. And that firearm, the gangsters on the Z80 now turns, which is a copy of a Beretta from the 80s. Hence, we had to give up these things. But more important about the thing about the Z88, the gangsters called it a Zulu. So whenever we heard the word Zulu, get the Zulu, a Zulu is the best gun. And then we later picked up through our informants that Zulu refers to a Z88. That's actually what they mean. They consider it as a very reliable gun. It doesn't jam. It is a brilliant 17 shooter, as they said, 16 in the mag, and you can one in the chamber, and it can operate like that for a long time. You store it because apparently our spring mechanisms in our magazine were of a higher quality than the higher firearms that we used to. You know, they don't wear out, and you don't have those problems. You don't have jamming. You don't have any of those things. So it was a sought-after weapon, the Z88. The other thing about the Z88, or the Zulu as the gangsters called it, was a belief that because this weapon was sold to them by police officers, and altered in a way that is so unique compared to whatever alterations they were made illegally to weapons before, that this gun is virtually untraceable. Okay? And therefore, they would encourage their hitmen, the gangs, to shoot with these guns, as it's less likely, even if it falls or something, that it will be traced, because the police won't know. It's like a ghost gun. So hence with these guns, compared to other guns on the Cape Flats, we had one, for example, where 16 murders were committed with one gun right across the Western Cape, across different gang areas. So there was a mythology about these guns, the Zulu. Hence, when we started this project, of course, we called it Project Impi, related to that kind of designation. That's where that,
Oh, was that the significance of a name, Impi, because of a gun was Zulu?
yeah. But the period we're talking about that the court focused on, I'm not talking about before and afterwards, based on the cases,
Mm.
was a period between 2007 and 17 and about the beginning of 2007, sorry, and about February 2015, February to March 2015. It is during that period that we traced many of these guns, um, and we found that about ballistically speaking through reports based on shells we collect from a scene and bullet points that we find in bodies or in the scene, and firearms that we seized later, that about 1,700 or just for that period of people were killed with these firearms, were murdered. I'm not talking, that's besides the 3,000 odd, 3,500 and more attempted murders that were committed. This is separate from that, for that period, and the multiple robberies that were committed that we found it. So it was really a sort of firearm. It was altered in a way, and it was used in multiple crimes. And the particular period we focus on is 2007 and to 2015. Now, how did it come about? Was that this happened? Firstly, partly out of rumor that was becoming very consistent on the Cape Flats. You know, informants, everybody, when you ask them about guns, they say, it's police guns, you know? But later, that's a normal refrain, you know, whether you ask that question in 1970 or you ask it in 75 or you ask it in 1990, and you probably will answer 20 years from now, that will be the answer. But there was such a consistency and a concentration of this being the case in the areas of Hanover Park and Menenberg that it forced us to relook at, let's analyze these things first beyond what our informers are telling us. And that's when we got two ballistic officers that were assigned to us who secretly and quietly, because of the corruption in our system, needed to establish this pattern. And that they then did. So they confirmed what our informants were saying. And through that, we were able to get all the cases to get together quietly. Now, because we were dealing with an internal thing and a thing at such a scale that it can either mean two things in the CF or Central Firearm Registry office or at head office. Either management is totally corrupt, or they are severely negligent, or they simply didn't do the job. Now, these are three questions we needed to test in our investigation. So you will understand why in the beginning, General Jacobs and I had to select a team that had to work very, very secretly. They would stay at their station so that we do not draw them, so that the impression is created that they are in something special hidden somewhere. Otherwise, the corrupt police officers would monitor us. And the corrupt people, particularly they had contacts in crime intelligence, would monitor us. So we had to keep it quite quiet. So we selected certain officers. I selected them on the basis of the fact that they worked with me in previous gang operations and were more reliable and had success, and they were above board as far as suspicion is concerned. And we formed the team. We even had secret facilities from which they worked when they are not at their station, so that we can protect that. We had our own communication setup. We had our own way. We did not operate via police radios. We even had our own cell phones that you could not trace through to official police service for communication purposes. It was a whole parallel process. And like I said, We now need to systematically determine where is the system problem. So if there was, for example, a provincial, if a firearm had disappeared in a certain province, then we needed to trace now, okay, how did this firearm that was supposed to be destroyed end up back there? Because there's supposed to be the inspection regime first and second level that goes right through from registers down to physical stock counts that need to check whether things are where they are, or if they are to be destroyed, where they are really destroyed. Because, I mean, you were watching TV and you see national commissioner after national commissioner dumping guns into furnaces and press and all of. And our problem was that there was always a few officers present at those things. And these officers would be the ones like Charles Nyide, Colonel Nyide, and Colonel Prinsloo, who seemed to be there. So they're consistently at all of these things. So something seriously is wrong somewhere. We intercepted some inspection registers by provincial commissioners that everybody had a tick box. Everything is order. Everything is in order. Everything order, as if they physically went to check things. We had generals from the National Commissioner's office who ticked everything is in order. Everything is perfect, based on a mere paper register inspection. But as we know now, everything was not in order. And in order to determine whether they were either negligent, corrupt, or just didn't do their job, we had to investigate them too. So every single national commissioner during this period, every single divisional commissioner who had anything to do with firearms, and every single officer in the SAPS Armory or the SAPS Central Firearm Registry, we investigated their integrity. If they signed an inspection or provincial commissioner, if the provincial commissioner of Gauteng at the time, it was General Petro, signed off on an inspection report that, for example, one of the stores of the province, Jameson, where a substantive amount of firearms went missing through plenties, and that inspection report during that period said, oh, no, everything was hunky-dory, it was okay. Then we monitor the provincial commissioner to determine, okay, is he getting rich too fast? Where's the source of money? Is there possible contact, or is he purely negligent? Or is he signing off on things blindly without ensuring that the necessary check plans? I'm sad to say, but in most cases, it was the latter part of what they were saying. People were simply not doing their job. And they were simply signing things on the reports, inspection reports that were not so. If it was as the report stated, then none of these guns would have gone missing.
So I guess it was only a matter of time before the top brass figured out what you guys were up to and started interfering in.
Yeah, it was a
Operation
matter of
Impi.
time. You see, because we continued for 2 to 3 years, quietly building up our case. I was a project manager, General Jacobs at the time at Crime Intelligence. We were able to now bring two things together. He also selected only particular people. We even went so far as to install, to monitor our two Central Firearm stores. We monitored the Central Firearm Registry offices. So we knew what was going on, and then we would trawl through mountains of footage and video footage to look at who's coming in here that belongs here. What system is being subverted here? What is the conduct of person A while they're supposed to do this job? What are they doing in the Central Firearm, in the store in Germiston, or in the store in Silverton? You understand? You pick up inconsistencies, and so we build up a pattern. And eventually, we even picked up people inside the store. It was like ShopRite, It was like there were illegal gun dealers and actual gun dealers who would come in there and officers would take them around, like Prince Lou and I do. And then they would work out, look in the store, and they say, oh, okay, there's a beautiful Purdy shotgun. I can sell and make a lot of money out of that. There's a Bren gun from the SANDF. There's a Dragunov rifle from something they seized in Angola. Here's a box full of Z88s. There's 20,000 rounds of ammunition. Okay. All the officer does, who stands there, okay, do you want that? No, fine. Then they sign off the destruction order. Then there's a big fanfare, and the national commissioner goes to a fiasco and a total joke where things allegedly get destroyed. There does. A few things go into the bin or into the crushing or into the furnace, but they never stay there the whole day, you see. And that's where the other guns go, to those who ordered it. So we picked up all of those things consistently over years, over the 3 years. But before we had to pounce, because we knew now it's going to be a big thing. We now are clear who was dirty, who was clean, who was negligent, who didn't do their job. Provincial commissioners or national commissioners didn't really matter to us. Right, we're going to pounce, but now we have to tell the people. Lucky for us, we had a Brit. She had just been appointed General Vearey, so she can't possibly be tied to the history of this thing, either negligently or else, or otherwise. We then told her she was deeply disturbed. She went to tell the minister at that time. I think it was it Martin Kleko, I think. She then told it, and General Jacobs and myself had to go brief them. And we said, look, we are going to arrest a very senior, important official in this environment. And consequently, there are serious implications for this. So many people have been killed. So many people have been injured. So many robberies have taken place with these guns. We can prove it. And we are opening ourselves up. We are telling you now. And to think we did this in 2016 and 27, we are telling you now, generals, all of you are open to civil liability. You're not criminal negligence.
You warned them then
But
already.
we told them then. And I think that's when our trouble started, soon after telling them that. But nonetheless, we went ahead, did our job, arrested Prince Lou and arrested some other parties who were with him. Then they disbanded us. Now, and they transferred Jacobs to cluster and me to Cape Town cluster. They dispersed and dissolved the whole team that was working on it, but lucky by now we were already going in court on some cases. But what is disturbing was out of Prince's plea bargaining, and I was personally involved in the interrogation of Prince Lou after his arrest for days. And some of the things that were coming up had international implications for this country.
Like?
Some of the SANDF firearms that were supposed to be destroyed, and we're talking about weapons of war here, ended up in Congo, ended up in areas where, I mean, at one stage somebody was saying, some of the guns were linked to there was this incident where the SANDF was involved in an altercation in Congo and some young children shot at them. It was a big story in the media back then. That some of these kids were being shot at with South African firearms. And we started, so the other part of this investigation that we would have gone into if we hadn't been stopped and dissolved was the part that involved arms being smuggled out to conflict areas. That's the one thing in Africa. The other part, in speaking to Prince Lou and to that, we then later picked up, but wait, man, this Western Cape market of gangs was a recent market. That long before this, Nyide and him had been involved in trafficking of such guns to conflict areas in KZN, the political conflict. to the east.
During the Natal War.
Yes, the Eastern Cape. Long before that, we're talking, that they've been involved because they've been there for a long time. They've been involved in that kind of trafficking of firearms. And also, I think round about the time of the Mall of Africa, there was a big taxi conflict around routes and a lot of shooting. They also supplied. So these people were not political people who, no matter what people might think of Prinsloo and his beard, he was not right wing. I told him to wear the beard, and I'll tell you the circumstances afterwards that came with that. But one of the things was that they purely, it was about money. They would, for example, again to tell you, there was one old lady in Prince Alfred here, who happened to, they would now know, let me explain how it works. They were also had an interest in antique firearms. So we had a lot of these old tannies and ooms who sat with 303 rifles in their shoulders and all these kind of things, but they were on record somewhere. So people like these corrupt guys would go around to them and say, "Hey, listen, we're going to lock you up. Hey, you're sitting with these guns. Best give it in."
Hmm.
But where those guns ended up is with collectors. There was one particular set, which is, I think, high value. I can't even think about it. But there was a set of dueling Purdy pistols that is somewhere in the 1800s,
Priceless.
solidly in a carved rosewood casing, ornate. Okay. That was sold for, I think it's £5 million or something like that. So to give you an idea, it was not only about guns going here, it was guns going into conflict, it was guns, collector's items. And the thing about South Africa being so sought of in terms of collector's items is a very interesting thing. The rifles used, I would say, from the South African War, Anglo-Boer War, as they call it, by the British, né, has a history that goes back to previous campaigns in India. And you can trace it on the markings of the firearm. There would be a stamp. Then you would know this was in India, this was in Burma, this was in that. And its final stop of all those weapons was our country, the Union of South Africa, during the war. And the weapons were left here. So it is a sort of to commodity if you're a collector internationally. If you're looking for an old military armament that was used, you are likely to find it here. So those are some of the things. If you're looking, for example, for First World War German weapons, you will find it here. Why? Because the Union Defense Force in 1914 went in, disarmed the Schutztruppe in Namibia and in Southwest Africa, and took all those firearms, and they became part of the collective arsenal. So you will really find sought after items here. The Purdy pistols, incidentally, was taken by the grandfather of this old lady whom they threatened that we're going to send you to jail if you don't give these things in. Had been taken from a British soldier who had died in a battle with the commandos, the war commandos. So you can understand there's lots of value in money. And to give you an example, these officers, they didn't live 1 or 2 years, didn't live physically off his police salary, but could go on holiday to a Greek island twice a year, could take his whole family, could live a life of luxury. And that's how it was. It was purely a cash business. Okay? No politics, no nothing, purely money making. So this is what Impi was about. Yeah.
Now, sorry to interrupt you, General. Continue.
Yeah. Like I said, we were disbanded. Okay. We could say we found about 1,200 around that region firearms back, but there were thousands still outstanding. Not
And
in
they
the
still
Western
are.
Cape. I'm not talking about what is still outstanding on the other side of our borders of our country and outstanding in the KZN and all of that environment, because they didn't have such teams and we never got there. Okay. But each one of those firearms that kill, we can now trace. And there's a record of how to do it, and we've had the success of it, and we've arrested somebody, and they went to prison who was involved in it. And there's other trials that are still emerging from it. So, but that does not excuse us as the police, because every gun that of that outstanding guns that kills again, and every day that goes by that we do not make any concerted effort to find those specific guns, we are increasing our liability. Victim death by death, murder by murder with those guns. So those are challenges. And I think we have the police has a moral responsibility, and just do the job. Do your job. Go reform. How do you tackle these things? You can't leave it up to a police station. They don't know. You need a specialized unit whose job it is specifically to go and find those guns before we become liable for 10, 12 murders with one gun, as we found with one firearm that we luckily got back that killed 16 people in a period of 2 months. So there's an obligation on us. But, the years have gone by and we've been disbanded, and some of us, the knowledge was dispersed and nobody brought together. And because of the record of the police, the SAPs not doing that job, the victims were never going to get any closure on the issue, get any answers. And it's for that reason that we firstly, at the time when we were the subject of a labor issue in 2017, General Jacobs and I resurfaced, because we needed to understand why are we being moved suddenly, that we resurfaced that in our labor court papers. And that is the first time the country and the world got to know that such a thing had been going on all these years and that we've been investigating. But despite that, it becoming public at that point in time, still nothing was done. And this is when I started engaging with Gun Free, because I was looking for who will help our people on the Cape Flats and help people who can't afford the justice that is due to them in here. Because the capacity, the project that I ran is dead. It's been taken away from them. So who's going to take this up? And if you pushed out your nose on it, you would be shot down, And an organization like Gun Free came to the labor court. They mulled around it for a few years afterwards. And when after I was dismissed for, what do they say? I said a word that was
You were disrespectful to a top police official.
spectrum to obvious with. After that had happened, given the frustration that went with that, but after that had happened, and I want to state it clearly now, I went back to Gun Free. So I went to Gun Free South Africa and I told them, you guys talk about guns and talk about victims. There's a lot of people talk about it, NGOs. Put your money where your mouth is. What if I give you an affidavit? Take me to a lawyer and I give you an affidavit explaining this whole thing. And that is what I did. I engaged with Scott Norton and Rose and Fulbright. And the position was, okay, our people can't afford anything, so country got them to do it pro bono. They're in for the long run. I made sure that all the victims' information gets given to Norton, that they get access. I made sure they have the information on who up the chain is all involved, either by negligence or corruption or whatever, in order to basically point out the systemic liability that the SAPs have. And, I know sometimes people say the minister is the respondent. Of course, he's up there, but by virtue of his office. He might not have been there back then in 2007, but by virtue of their office, that is why they take response. The provincial commissioners who are all cited in the document with notification of the pending act, the provincial commission, their offices, the office of the provincial commissioner were responsible, their liability needs to be determined because they also have Central Firearm Registry offices at a provincial level. How is it that something at this scale can happen consistently over a period of 20, 30 years without anybody ever picking it up?
20, 30 years.
Yes, it goes back longer. We only cut off at a certain point. When I told you, I told you on 2007 to 2015. But from what our investigations prove, that there were other people who did these things before.
And do you think there are still people doing it now?
Yeah, I do believe so. There are people doing it now. You must understand, it's not only at the level of Central Firearm Registry corruption, it's not only at the level of this. You know, in 2017, we also exposed the case in which I'm testifying against Ralph Stansfield and 18 others, where people got 3 licenses for firearms, including an LM6, a Glock, and another rifle, all in a matter of 5 days. 5 days. They never went through the administrative system. They never went through the station like any normal license out, but they're sitting with a legitimate license. We proved that it was, and gangsters or something, 28 gangsters. In that investigation, we proved another form of corruption in the Central Firearm Registry, where at a large scale, I mean, there were people who there's one police station in Gauteng. I don't want to mention the name for the court case, where there are 200 licenses issued in 1 month on the police station's address. But the people, the licenses, don't live there. So because of that station's corruption, it is first giving people leeway through having false addresses on the system, where if they had given their normal addresses, they would probably be considered a risk in that particular context. There are people whose criminal records were not even, in some cases, they checked. Like this case I'm going to testify in against some 20 members of the 28 gang. They well profiled in the police. Any simple check would have determined their links, or any simple check via crime intelligence. But then again, crime intelligence is another other corrupt institution, which I don't want to go into too much now at the time. But any check would have shown that these people are flagged. And if, besides that check showing you, you must ask yourself, how does suddenly a group of large concentration of people from Valhalla Park or Plain suddenly ending up living in some area in Gauteng and commute between them? There are simple checks, but if the system is corrupt enough, you can that. And our investigation exposed that, and they are on trial. They're going to trial on the High Court, and I will be testifying that matter. But growing out of that investigation of the CFR was the one who assigned Colonel Kinnear to do also. But now we had a pattern. There are wholesale stations that facilitate illegal licenses corruptly to institutions, not only them, but also security companies. It's what we discovered with the Moda case. Okay, security companies, they're getting 50, 60 guns in 3 days. I mean, how is that possible? Sometimes you don't even have a company, you just have a name and it goes through. We found after we seized registers from some police stations in Gauteng, when we checked their addresses, one company got 56 pistols, but the company doesn't exist. We went physically to the address where the company was supposed to. They don't exist. There's no such company. So we have 56 guns. Where are they? You get what I'm saying? So the scale
Yeah.
is,
What is the solution, General? How can this be stopped?
firstly, the first thing is the firearm investigation unit we had in the 90s. It continued into the late 90s. That was disbanded by Jackie Zulu. Worked.
I remember.
Because we could prove to people that we did something to go get guns that were lost. You know? And not only that, you know, if there's a murder today by a civilian with a firearm, for example, do you know we can get a conviction with the other evidence we can gather without ever bringing that gun to court? So calculate that according to our law over the past 200 years, and you can imagine our guns are really out there. We've been successful. We've got our person in jail. We have no obligation to confine that gun because the docket is closed. That's the important thing you should. We are not Sweden where they search for 20 years for a gun that killed Olof Palme. And until they get everything, then only they proceed. But what I'm trying to say, you know, is but that is a legal thing that is particular, unique to our law coming from the Commonwealth country. And there's no obligation. So can you imagine what a firearm investigation unit is? They went to go find those guns because he knew. We went to court, we got the conviction. Now we need to work harder. Maybe if the person is convicted, they will tell us now where the gun is. You know, maybe it helps with their parole for that matter. But there was a dedicated unit that did this because you can't have everybody from all over the stations in the country running around trying to do this. And when are they going to have time for other works? Very specialized. It was how we were able to deal with trafficking of firearms across our borders. It's how we were able to get the firearms used in past political conflicts, Qatar, ANC, or third force violence and all that. We were able to get it because we had a unit that went to look for them. And that is what we need now. We have a larger scale of firearms out there than that we had in the worst political conflicts in this country. And we had a unit that looked for it. Now, I think simple management logic will tell you that that is the direction that we. And the other question that I raise personally, and I've been there, I've investigated, I've seen the depth of the rot. We should really be asking ourselves, does the Central Firearm Registry belong in the South African Police Service? You know, I am a believer that provinces should have a decision, play a role in the administration of this. And they should also play a role in whether or not licenses are granted to who and when. Because one of the other disturbing points that we have, you know, thing in our law is there's no criteria set out against which you, or metrics in which you determine the validity of a self-defense. I mean, we have people in Llandudno who have more guns than people on the Cape Flats. Now, if there's no crime in Llandudno that warrants a gun being used as self-defense, for people to live in Llandudno and work, probably drive around the route, the coastal route, and go and work in the fancy air-conditioned offices in Cape Town. There's no logic to that. Self-defense there is purely a subjective feeling. And that is the problem in our law. It's a purely subjective determination. It is not objectively measured. Because if we had measured that objectively, then a lot more people in high violent criminals would be sitting with guns. But that is what I'm saying. So these things need to be looked at. People got reasons for firearms, for example, based on political imperatives in the past, you know. Die swart gevaar, die rooi gevaar, die kleurlik gevaar, of wat ook al gevaar, as jy gebied wanneer jy kry kan, self-defense. So it's something that needs to be looked at. in terms of that. And I really believe that if a province or Pitsonawata or Pop Adder decides, there's no reason why we need guns here because there's not much violence. The only thing we need guns for here is hunters needs guns because hunting is an important profession. Then fine, let people decide. Let a local government authority or a province decide. Make that the prerogative to decide. Why must it be centrally determined in terms of some subjective feeling of people that is never
Mm.
tested objective? So that is one of the things I really believe with the police, we have proven. Don't only talk about now. Gaan terug na die dae van die Zaps. Historically, this has always been a key source of corruption in the police. Maybe like other countries, we should think out of the box on this issue. There are countries, and I'm not saying I support that option, where organizations in the small arms trade, like almost in a type of business against crime, kind of whatever association or some trade or some trade guild, for example, decide on these matters. But I mean, that is an extreme situation, like in some countries in Latin America. But there are other countries where it is, for example, with home affairs, with local authorities, with all of those things. And I think this is the way we should be going. It must be devolved, and people, and I believe it will ensure that we have a wider monitoring system to keep our hand on these things. So firearms kill, whether we like it or not. Ne? They kill. Let's not argue. They don't scratch. They kill if you do it. And it is definitely something that needs to be monitored much better than trying to centralize it in a single institution like the SAPS. We need to disperse the administration of that registry system and the issuing of licenses. Because we've proven time and time licenses get issued to gangsters.
Mm.
Some through, well, my opa ken iemand in die polisie in Pretoria. So, that kind of the inside old boys there. That's how it happens. It's not objectively determined. And I believe there should be greater civic responsibility through public representatives in that. Maybe people in Pitsonawata don't want to have guns. They don't force it on them. You understand? So those are, I think,
Yes.
some of the things that we should look at. And my role in Gun Free has been to bring those type of insights to it. And I'm an ex-soldier. I've shot all of these guns. I've trained things all over the world, and I know what these things do. And not even I will trust myself and the system that gives me position to think that I have a lifetime competency because I have a license. I believe I get old. I might have I myself, my own firearm that I got from training officially, I gave it in for destruction. I hope it wasn't Prince who didn't smuggle that to somebody. But the point is, I must know, any soldier you speak to will know that you are not forever competent.
Mm.
It takes practice. And these days, shooting a paper target is not the kind of practice that gives you handling the situation in your life situation. It does not prepare you for that. You need a constant level of training that instinctively nurtured
Mm.
keeps that competency alive in you.
Mm.
And it's very expensive. Okay, so those are some of the things that, like I said, is of concern. But one bigger concern for me is there's also something South Africans we must look at it. Is our culture, our mindset when it comes to firearms. I think we've moved way beyond self-defense. And I want to use an example. I read a lot of gun magazines. I've always been and one of the interesting was a Magnum tactical guide in June 2022. Now, that article on defense arms and how you choose a defense arm, I want to quote from what the writer in one article says on the defense arms. He said, when you choose a defense handgun, he says, and I quote, the most important factors to consider are whether the handgun is reliable, can it be carried comfortably for extended periods, and is it of large enough caliber to ensure reliable penetration of the vitals of whatever you are shooting. Now, just by reading that, this is what is going to tell me. I would go for a Magnum 357, probably a Ruger. So we have this occupation with the killing power of a firearm that exceeds beyond the same. And if I look at ammunition, for example, the very same article on advice as to what ammunition you should choose for your gun says bullet expansion should also be consistent to ensure reliable penetration and a large wound channel. Now, what does that mean? It moves beyond its over penetration, firearm language, and it focuses more on the lethality and the damage it causes rather than the mere stopping power.
Just immobilizing the person.
But immobilizing the person. So these are the kind of things I think, if this is the culture that South African gun owners are being exposed to inform their choices of ammunition and choice of guns, then we have a wrong mindset in this country. There needs to be some reset around this. And I think the debate is not only about legislation. It's not only about where the registries, the firearm registry, about it. It is about us as South Africans and the way we relate to this thing called a gun, a firearm. We just have a think this type of thinking is not prevalent in other cultures. We have a country like Sweden, where everybody almost has automatic firearms and are highly trained in firearms. You don't have this. What is it about that system? What is it about the mindset of people while you have those firearms that does not produce the kind of thing that we have here? You know, you have China, you have other countries where people have firearms. What is it about the mindset that does not result at the scale in the scale of violence and negligent losses and trafficking that we have in this country? To me, those are questions that also need to be